has reaffirmed that things will only change when the tanks are gone and the refugees returned. Paul Royal, BBC News.
Our correspondent Mike Williams is one of the few Western journalists still in the Yugoslav capital Belgrade. Like all reporters there, his movements are restricted and his words are being monitored. He joins me on the line now. Mike, what can you tell us to add to what we've already heard about the overnight attacks?
Well,
1,000 more ground troops to Albania to help deal with the huge exodus of refugees from Kosovo. The alliance says Operation Allied Harbour will provide military support for relief workers already there. The refugee crisis continues across the region. Our correspondent Jonathan Charles sent this report from the border between Kosovo and Macedonia.
Serbian troops patrol Kosovo's border with Macedonia. Tension is rising following the shooting dead of a Macedonian soldier. The precise details of the incident aren't clear, but the killing is symptomatic of the uneasy peace which reigns here. At the Jasinska frontier post, there's no sign of the thousands of refugees who clogged the border until 48 hours ago. They've been forced to return to their homes by Serb units, an attempt by President Milosevic to prove to the outside world that everything in Kosovo is now normal, safe for ethnic Albanians to inhabit. When I visited Jasinska earlier in the week, a queue of cars stretched back 20 miles. Now only a few are waiting in vain to leave Kosovo. Journalists certainly aren't welcome.
Don't go in Yugoslavia. You are NATO, you bomba. Ajde.
For those who've left this behind, for the refugees who've escaped Kosovo, life is slowly improving. British and other NATO soldiers are trying to turn chaos into order at hastily erected camps in Macedonia. The refugees are receiving food and medical attention. Providing enough for everyone, though, is hard. These people know they may be here for a long time, certainly months, and possibly even years. Jonathan Charles, BBC News, on the Kosovo-Macedonian border.
Jonathan Charles in the Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia told me on the line earlier that there were still no clear answers surrounding the shooting of a Macedonian soldier on the border with Kosovo. A team in Montenegro has been released after being held by Yugoslav troops for 23 hours. Our World Affairs correspondent Jeremy Bowen was filming in the city of Nikšić when he was arrested. Anger at NATO airstrikes against the Serbs is growing in Montenegro. One priest said the Serb people are being crucified by NATO, just like the Jews crucified Christ.
This is the holiest week of the year for Orthodox Christians. On Sunday, they celebrate Easter. It seemed like a good time to go to Nikšić, to its Orthodox church, to see what Serbs here thought about the war. Nikšić is the second city of Montenegro, Serbia's junior partner in the Yugoslav Federation. The priest told me that the Serb church is about peace and love. It's also about Serb identity and nationalism. The Serb people, Father Marko Durković said, are being crucified by NATO just like the Jews crucified Christ. The people of Nikšić live in Montenegro, but they consider themselves Serbs and they identify strongly with Belgrade. I told the mayor we were in town. He warned us that some people here were getting very angry about the bombing. At first, locals in the main cafe didn't want to talk to us at all. When they did, they talked about betrayal. The word was used over and over again. Why, they asked, had Britain betrayed the old Second World War alliance with Yugoslavia? I respect the British. Why did they do it? Now they're our biggest enemies. I thought we were friends forever. And I'm not for Milosevic. I'm for my kids. Everybody I spoke to in Nikšić agreed that the longer the bombing goes on, the more they're rallying around President Milosevic, which is making him stronger. I think these were authentic views. This report hasn't been censored. But not long after these pictures were taken, the BBC team was arrested, not by Montenegrin police, but by federal troops, loyal to Belgrade.
We've just been released from 23 hours detention by Yugoslav military police. Our guards, who were armed all the time, behaved correctly. There were some nasty moments, though. 3 of my colleagues were roughed up by Yugoslav soldiers. who had to be dragged away by the guards. The Montenegrin government tells us that we can report freely from here. The Yugoslav Federal Army, though, has other ideas. It is clearly trying to tighten Belgrade's control over this republic. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Podgorica, Montenegro.
Back now to events overnight, and our correspondent William Horsley is at the NATO headquarters in Brussels. He says the alliance's bombing missions overnight were hampered by bad weather. Well, events in Kosovo continue to have repercussions further afield, including Israel. The Israeli Foreign Minister Ariel Sharon has been widely quoted as expressing a fear that NATO's action might lead to the establishment of an extremist Islamic state in Kosovo. His comments have angered not just the United States, but also many ordinary Israelis, for whom ethnic cleansing in Kosovo provokes disturbing memories of the past.
For the sake of Kosovo, Tel Aviv was transformed. Thousands flocking to the central square in a rally. Its slogan, Israel must help. The country's top singers sang messages of support for Kosovo's refugees. In a country which was built by the victims of the worst episode of ethnic cleansing this century, the issues at stake in Kosovo have profound resonance.
We as Israeli people, we have many problems and troubles, and it's quite familiar for us. Also the Holocaust and everything, people, and it's very important to show that we're not closing our eyes for the Holocaust that is happening over there.
It makes me feel very, very sad. I want to help them. I'm glad Israel is doing what they can to help them.
The event raised thousands of dollars for the refugees. Israel, usually obsessed with its own problems, for once has another focus.
The mood at this rally clearly represents the overwhelming feeling of support here in Israel for the Kosovans. In a country which is so closely allied to the West, you'd expect the politicians to follow suit, but that's not quite the case.
The foreign minister, Ariel Sharon, has been quoted as saying that NATO's intervention could give birth to a dangerous Islamic state in Kosovo and lead to global instability. The United States is offended by his comments. But key right-wingers here share his reservations.
The bombardment of Belgrade and other cities and civilian population also in Yugoslavia is doubtful, especially after the Serbs announced their readiness for ceasefire.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has distanced himself from the ruckus, expressing his support for NATO. He even hosted this Kosovan refugee family to a meal at his residence in a blatant attempt to woo public support. On Macedonia's border with Kosovo, the only hospital for miles has been set up by Israelis. This man was badly beaten as he tried to cross the border. The leaders of one of America's key foreign allies may be in disarray over their policy on Kosovo, but for ordinary Israelis, the echoes of history are all too clear. Hilary Anderson, BBC News.
You're watching BBC World.
The towering mountain ranges that stretch across northern Albania provide the aid agencies with their greatest challenge in reaching the hundreds of thousands in desperate need. The narrow potholed road that runs 120 kilometers north from the capital Tirana is the only route to the refugees. It's a slow, tortuous journey that's meant relief supplies lie stockpiled back in Tirana. We saw virtually no aid vehicles on our way north. Only 12 tons of food and 2,000 sets of clothes and blankets reached Kukës yesterday. The Italian Red Cross camp for the sick and for children holds just 3,000 in a town where 88,000 people still remain in the open. In fact, they're being encouraged to leave within a few days to reduce the pressure on a town swamped by the influx. And so they go, 5,000 to 6,000 a day, hoping to find shelter in the south. The relief in surviving the butchery in Kosovo replaced now with a numbing realization that, at least for the moment, there is no way back. A people in collective shock, but still determined that one day they will return.
Do you think you'll ever get back to Kosovo?
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
Oh.
I think.
Everything will come back to Kosovo.
No one knows where this particular journey will end. All these people do understand is that every mile takes them further from their homes and their communities back in Kosovo. Scenes like these repeated all over northern Albania as the flood of refugees slowly trickles south. Peter Sharp, Sky News in northern Albania.
Well, here in Britain, an appeal was launched to raise money for the Disasters Emergency Committee. Sir Paul Fox is heading that organisation. Sir Paul, good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
How much money have we raised so far?
Well, last night at midnight, the total raised was 6.4 million, which is a wonderful sum, of course. I'm always amazed by the generosity of the British public, and we're enormously grateful. We act on behalf of the 12 aid agencies who are actually working in the area, and we're simply a distributor.
On Sky News, it's Friday the 9th of April, and for the 16th night in succession, NATO warplanes have pounded targets in Yugoslavia.
Serbian television claims civilian buildings were damaged, and these are the main developments. Explosions rocked eastern Belgrade overnight as NATO sought for a third week to force Yugoslavia into an autonomy and peacekeeping deal over Kosovo. Serb television reported that missiles had struck a fuel depot in the town of Smederevo.
Families of the 3 US servicemen being held hostage are on their way to the American airbase at Ramstein in Germany. The acting Greek Cypriot President Spiros Kyprianou is attempting to negotiate their freedom, but President Clinton has expressed doubts about the prospects of an early release.
8,000 NATO troops are being deployed along the Kosovo border with Albania, sparking fresh speculation about a ground offensive against the Serbs. The troops are from NATO's heavily armed and highly trained European Rapid Reaction Force. It brings the total number of NATO troops massed on the Kosovo borders to more than 20,000. But this morning, the Foreign Secretary Robin Cook has again insisted there are no plans to begin a ground offensive.
NATO has again hit targets around the Serbian capital of Belgrade. It's the 16th night of bombing in a row. NATO is to send 8,000 more troops to the Albanian and Kosovo border. Tony Blair's denied they're part of any plans for a ground offensive and says they're only there to help with the refugee crisis.
NATO continues to target Serb fuel supplies. Last night it was the turn of the Yugo petrol oil company in the central Serbian town of Smederevo. The NATO missiles scored direct hits on several fuel depots. There were no immediate reports of any casualties. NATO warplanes bombed targets in Belgrade, concentrating on the city's eastern suburbs. Hundreds of civilians formed a human shield on Belgrade's central Brankov bridge, swaying to a rock band and saying they were confident they would prevent NATO from destroying the bridge. There were similar scenes on the last remaining bridge in the northern city of Novi Sad. Meanwhile, NATO is sending 8,000 more troops to the Balkans. The force, part of the Allied Command Europe Mobile Force, known as ACE, will help with the refugee crisis in Albania. But they are crack troops and may include British paras, fueling speculation that they could eventually be used in a ground offensive against Serb forces in Kosovo. Adam Brown, Sky News.
Yugoslavia reportedly wants to form a political union with Russia and Belarus. The Russian President Boris Yeltsin was quoted as saying the offer was made by the Yugoslav leader Slobodan Milosevic last week. Mr. Yeltsin said the proposal will be looked at closely.
Western aid has started to flood into the Balkans to help the Kosovo refugees. But the difficult terrain and the Albania-Kosovo border and a lack of suitable roads means that often it doesn't reach those who need it most. Peter Sharp reports from the Albanian border town of Kukes, where thousands of refugees are still without food or shelter.
Kosovo and the struggle to feed and house tens of thousands of refugees is a difficult exercise in logistics. Millions of tons of equipment has to be transported to the region, much of it from the United States. Our US correspondent Stuart Ramsey reports now on the operation to supply Kosovo.
Commercial 747s and huge C-5 military transporter planes working side by side. This is Dover Air Force Base on America's East Coast. An aerial superport, they call it, one of the busiest airports in the world. It's from here that America's military action over Yugoslavia is supplied and is the shipping port for aid to the refugees of the Kosovo crisis. For a week they've been sending supplies to the Balkans, 1.1 million pounds of food aid, a commercial cost of over 20 million pounds.
It is the largest event that I personally have witnessed here in Dover in such a short period of time.
And that's just simply because you're having to do it so quickly?
Well, lives are at risk.
The food being delivered to the refugee camps is specially designed for people in disaster zones. There are 2 main meals, enough calories to help you survive for one day.
It also contains a set of vegetable biscuits, a shortbread cookie, and peanut butter and jelly. It also contains a set of fruit bars. The one thing these things have consistently in common is high in protein, high in fat content, designed to ease somebody's system who's gone without those for several days.
It's an open-ended mission. No time limits have been set. Once the food's been distributed, it's likely to be followed by tents, blankets and other building materials. The US Air Force estimates that once a flight leaves here, the aid is distributed in the Balkans within 24 hours. Initially, the American people were less than supportive of the NATO action over Yugoslavia. The refugee crisis has changed things considerably. The majority now even support the use of ground troops. And it's from here that they'll leave if the US government changes its stated aim of bombing runs only. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Dover Air Force Base, Delaware.
In other news, the status in the Union's Parliamentary Assembly. Mr. Yeltsin condemns the NATO strikes on Yugoslavia and is trying to broker an end to the conflict. Coming up,
Russia's Interfax news agency quoted the Duma's speaker as saying that President Yeltsin had ordered the country's strategic missiles to be aimed at those NATO states bombing Yugoslavia. Sky's defense experts say retargeting missiles takes only seconds, and the gesture is most likely to be politically symbolic.
The Foreign Secretary Robin Cook has denied that an 8,000-strong NATO force being sent to the region would be part of the build-up to a ground war. The elite troops are part of the European Rapid Reaction Force and would boost the number of soldiers massed along Kosovo's borders to 20,000.
NATO attacked...
Go for the latest in a moment, but first this from Sky's Mark Smith.
The Speaker of Russia's lower house, the Duma, said President Boris Yeltsin had ordered the country's strategic missiles to be aimed at the states involved in bombing Yugoslavia.
There's a technical adjustment. Those missiles were always capable of being aimed at NATO states at the press of a button, and were never really not aimed at NATO states. So this is, I say again, is a political statement.
The NATO offensive against the Serbs continues to intensify. Last night, the sky over central Serbia was lit up by thousands of gallons of burning petrol. NATO missiles have scored direct hits on several such depots. The Allies also bombed targets in Belgrade, concentrating on the Yugoslav capital's eastern suburbs. For the second night, hundreds of people formed a human shield on the city's central Brankov Bridge, saying they were confident the action would prevent it from being destroyed. There were similar scenes on the last remaining bridge in the northern city of Novi Sad. NATO's strategy of targeting fuel supplies is aimed at weakening Serb forces by reducing their mobility. The less fuel available, the harder it is for them to get around. But NATO has dismissed speculation that it's aiming to curb propaganda from Belgrade by putting Yugoslav state television out of action.
We're not going to target specifically Serb TV. It's not necessarily our favourite television, obviously, but we're not going to target it. What we have said is that where the Serb TV transmitters are integrated, as many of them are, into military radio relay stations, then they will be a legitimate target.
In Kosovo, Serb forces are continuing to defy NATO air attacks. This soldier, interviewed on Yugoslav television, claims to have shot down a pilotless Allied aircraft. The United States is this morning awaiting word from Belgrade on whether President Milosevic will agree to release 3 captured U.S. soldiers during an expected meeting with Cypriot envoy Spiros Kyprianou. Washington is adamant there should be no conditions attached to their release. Mark Smith, Sky News.
Of what it claims are hundreds of ethnic Albanians returning to their homes. The station has broadcast a report in English which claimed the refugees had fled from Pristina because of NATO bombs.
More than 100 vehicles full of ethnic Albanians returned from General Jankovic border crossing after the statement of Mr. Ibrahim Rugova that bombing has to be stopped. Ethnic Albanians decided to return to their homes after Mr. Rugova met with Russian Ambassador Yuri Koto and with Vice President of Yugoslav Federal Government and Nikola Šejinović. Albanians that spent few days on Yugoslav-Macedonian border said that they fled their homes in fear of NATO missiles. More than 300 vehicles returned in 24 hours with ethnic Albanians, but some of them stopped because of constant pounding of Kosovo and Metohija by NATO war criminals in order to more people.
This is an action that NATO can
and will win.
Russia says it may now have to get militarily involved in the Kosovo crisis if it's forced to do so by the United States. President Yeltsin had previously insisted Russia would not be drawn into the Balkans under any circumstances. The change follows a statement by President Yeltsin in which he said he could not allow the Western alliance to seize Yugoslavia by sending in ground troops. The move comes as NATO warplanes carried out a 17th day of airstrikes on Yugoslavia, hitting an oil depot and a weapons complex containing the country's only car plant. As Yugoslavia's military comes under increasing pressure, Belgrade announces a pact with Russia, which would allow Russian troops onto Yugoslavian soil. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Sadako Agata, is in Macedonia. She's due to meet the Macedonian leadership during the day. Hello and welcome to this World Today special on the crisis in Kosovo. I'm Stephen Cole. The Russian President Boris Yeltsin says Russia will not get militarily involved in Kosovo unless the United States forces it to do so. He said Russia could not allow the Western alliance to seize Yugoslavia by sending in ground troops. Until now, Mr. Yeltsin has insisted Russia would not get involved militarily in the Balkans under any circumstances. Well, the apparent shift in policy came as Russia's parliamentary speaker told the Interfax news agency that President Yeltsin had ordered the country's strategic missiles to be aimed at those states bombing Yugoslavia. Russia's defense forces deny they've received any such orders. Meanwhile, overnight, NATO warplanes unleashed wide-ranging attacks against Yugoslavia on Orthodox Good Friday. They hit an oil depot and a weapons complex containing the country's only car plant. During the attacks, thousands of Serbs formed human shields on bridges in Belgrade and in the northern town of Novi Sad. The British Prime Minister Tony Blair appeared to raise the stakes in the conflict with a veiled threat to Belgrade that independence for Kosovo could now be an option. All borders from Kosovo have been closed during the last 24 hours. Closed, in fact, ever since the Yugoslavian authorities declared the unilateral ceasefire earlier in the week. But despite the move, 1,000 refugees have crossed on foot to Macedonia, avoiding official crossing points. 1,000 more have turned up in Montenegro, and just 27 managed to cross over into Albania. 4,000 more have moved from Montenegro to Albania. An estimated total of 623,000 people have now left Kosovo since March 1998, when the crisis began. Of those, Albania has taken 303,000, Macedonia 118,000, Montenegro 60,000, and Serbia 50,000. Bosnia-Herzegovina has taken 24,500, Western Europe 100,000, and Turkey 7,500. Well, meanwhile, NATO is deploying a further 8,000 troops to Albania to help cope with the refugee crisis. The airstrikes are also continuing, as Nick Childs reports.
This man, the Speaker of the Russian Parliament, is reported as claiming that President Yeltsin has ordered Russian missiles to be targeted on NATO countries. No word of that from the Kremlin. But mounting nationalist anger in the Russian parliament has forced President Yeltsin to issue a new warning to NATO not to intervene on the ground in Kosovo. NATO continues to pound away at Serb targets. This, according to Serb television, was a fuel depot at Smederevo. Other military and industrial targets were hit across Serbia, including a car plant said also to be used for arms production. But for the alliance, once again, bad weather has been getting in the way of its efforts to step up the military pressure still further on the Belgrade authorities. And this is how Yugoslavia has been fighting back. Crowds form a human shield against possible NATO attacks on the last remaining bridge across the Danube in the northern town of Novi Sad. It's become a regular parade of defiance by Serbs, and one that certainly complicates NATO's planning. NATO's other priority is humanitarian assistance. This aid is on its way to Albania. 8,000 NATO troops will follow, purely to help the refugees, the alliance says, not to invade Kosovo. But from the British Prime Minister, a warning to President Milosevic that the NATO powers may have to look beyond the Rambouillet agreement on autonomy for the province.
He has to realize that it is much more difficult to secure any link with the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia after what has happened. Now, that is obviously something we have to consider at a later stage. And as I say to you, any lasting settlement has to be based on the process that was there in France. But of course, I mean, you're quite right, it becomes a lot more difficult.
Refugee camp in Macedonia. The country estimates it has received about 130,000 Kosovo refugees. The Macedonian government says it's been promised more than $40 million in aid from the World Bank to help care for them. Well, joining me now...
General Kofi Annan, as we told you earlier, is calling on Belgrade to halt what he calls the intimidation and expulsion of civilians from Kosovo. The demand is part of a 5-point program he is urging the Yugoslav government to accept. In return, he says he will call on the NATO alliance to suspend its bombing campaign.
Ultimately, the cessation of hostilities I propose is a prelude to a lasting political solution to the crisis, which can only be achieved through diplomacy. In this context, I would urge the resumption of talks on Kosovo among all parties concerned at the earliest possible moment.
Borders and the return of those people wanted to stage another propaganda exercise, saying that those people will be safe now in their country, and they could go back, hoping that airstrikes will stop. When they realize that this has not worked, they're probably expelling them again, because their final aim is to expel everybody from their homes.
Certainly there's stories from some of the 200 or so families who came through, said they were given minutes to leave their villages and came across within 30 minutes. Some of them.
Yes, it's the same stories that we have been hearing them time and time again. They just go to the village, they expel everybody, they loot the village, they burn down the village, and but the worrying thing is that those people, they said that there was some 3,000 of them and only 1,500 came out of them. So we might happen in, I mean, things what's happening there, we might be seeing mass graves as we've seen them in Bosnia before, and there are reports from inside Kosovo that is happening.
You don't think that this then heralds a new wave or new influx? You worry that those people may not be able to leave once again?
Well, you never know. I mean, all these things can only be pure calculation, because you never know what's on the mind of Serbia. What we know is that their ultimate aim, the end aim of everything, is to get out every Albanian from that region and depopulate it with Serbs.